looking at the page. It's not coming up yet.
Okay, good. You can tell me when we're on.
Oh, there we go. Looks like we are.
Okay. Hi, most of us have been cooped up at home like this for 5 weeks or so. We've got new rhythms in our days. We have new routines. We've got safer ways to exist too. And we've heard from some of you that you're saying that you are really out of your comfort zone, physically and mentally. I get that. I'm Marianne Milano, and my primary role here is to connect you with our KTIS family, with us here at KTIS. We want to help encourage you and bring you hope. Believe me, there couldn't be a better time to do that than now. Tonight, I have a really special guest. You're going to love her. It's Dr. Melissa Mork. She's going to help us try to figure out how we can better cope and even, yes, find some joy and humor during this crazy pandemic that's become such a major disruption, stress in our lives. I want to show you something. I'm going to share my screen with you. You may have seen these at the grocery store the other day or now. Here we go. There are 2 magazine covers. One has The Age of Anxiety, Beyond Stress, Lessons and Treatments. You are not alone. And those emojis, I feel like we see them on our feeds all the time. And then we have, there's a paramedic in New York who says, we're being asked to put our lives at risk to fight something. I feel like I was drafted. Ouch. It seems like every corner that we turn, there's a conversation or an image like this reminds us of uncertainty, of our less than ideal feelings, that basically our lives are seriously at risk. I mean, we're for sure, there's just like minor annoyances, and some of us are scared and angry and lonely, and it's just hard stuff right now. Well, that's what we're going to try to dig into tonight. I'm going to do my best to unshare my screen. Is it unshared now?
I'm still seeing it.
You're still seeing it. All right, hold on. Let's see. Dr. Melissa Mork is here. Let's see if I can do this. Oh, gosh.
There is nothing more entertaining than watching a middle-aged lady work on technology.
I practice. Oh, hold on. Here we go. Another screen. Here we go. Sorry, guys. All right. Melissa Mork is here. Dr. Mork for now. Melissa, thank you. Thank you. I'm stressed. I need emojis. Gosh. You know, I know that that you've got a lot of experience. And why don't you just tell us, you're an author, you're a comic, you're a mom, you're a professor. Tell us a little bit about you first, and then we'll just dive in to see how we can become more resilient today.
Yeah, you kind of covered it, but there's a little backstory I want to talk about. So when I was in college, my parents both passed away, and then I had a series of losses throughout my adulthood. Last summer, when I was looking at our wedding photos for our wedding anniversary, I realized that out of the 16 people in our wedding party, only 6 of us are still alive. 10 of our wedding party had passed away, including my husband, who died 2.5 years ago of a very aggressive non-smoker's lung cancer. And so I have had significant losses in my life. And as my kids and I were beginning to navigate through that really horrific loss of Scott, I realized one of the things that was getting us through, in addition to our faith, was our sense of humor and our ability to laugh when we would remember him, and laugh at some of his foibles and his dad jokes and his puns and just some of his idiosyncrasies and quirks. It helped bring him closer to us again, to relocate him in our heart. And so I have been really focusing on how do we use humor as well as faith in navigating some of the harder times of life. And boy, here we are in something that is unprecedented and really surreal. Like, if this is just a surreal experience that none of us has ever had to go through before. So that's my background.
Besides humor, and we'll have to dig into how that happens. How have you been handling this new normal yourself? You know, as a mom, and you're a teacher, what's life like been for you as a mom and professor?
Well, there are days where I'm just doing great. You know, I get up and I make my bed and I brush my teeth and I, exercise, and I think I've got a handle on the day. And then, later that day or the next day, I'm sitting there kind of staring into the middle distance over my coffee mug and just wondering, like, not even really thinking about anything, just kind of dissociated from what's going on around me. And then there are other days where I just want to pull the covers over my head and go back to sleep for the remainder of the day. And I cry a lot, and I'm clumsy, and I'm forgetful, and I'm slightly irritable, and all of those things that indicate that I'm really stressed out. And I miss my students so much, and I miss my colleagues. We didn't get to say goodbye to them. We didn't get to say goodbye to our students because everything happened during spring break. And I didn't get to say goodbye to my friends on campus. And it's just a lot of
So what do you
anxiety
do?
and
So
worry.
you're up and down. Do you go with it? Do you cry yourself to sleep? I mean, what do you do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have to name it. I have some very good friends that I will talk with on the phone or through Marco Polo, or, we'll connect somehow or on Zoom. And the first thing I do is just tell them how I'm actually feeling. Like when they say, "How are you doing?" I don't say, "Fine, I'm great. The joy of the Lord is my strength," which he is, but I have to be authentic and true to what I'm doing and going through, and especially with my kids. They read my face. They are like the perfect barometers of my emotional state. So
Why
they
is
read
that?
my,
What do your kids do? Because this may help for those of you at home who are watching and wondering, oh yeah,
well,
my kids do that too.
yeah, well, my kids, because my resting face is not a very pleasant one. Like my resting face looks like I'm in serious distress as it is. And so they'll look at my face and say, "Are you okay?" And I'll say, I purposefully will shift my face to say, "I'm going to be okay," or "Yes, I am okay," or "I need to laugh. Let's play some Uno," or whatever it is. And I check in on them as well. So we're kind of just checking in on each other. How you doing? Before anything escalates, before anything exacerbates, before anything gets super triggered, we're checking in with each other to see how
So
you
checking
doing.
in with each other on a little deeper feeling. I want you
Yes.
at home to know that you can write questions in the comments. Melissa's going to be here to answer them. If you have comments, if you have maybe you have a helpful tip, you could share with us. We'd love to see that as well. Melissa also has a lot of different resources, including a book link and just resources, blog posts, and a lot of good stuff. We're going to also have that in the comments for you too. I don't want to forget about that. Let me ask you, what's been, not very helpful for you?
Oh, for me, overconsumption has not been helpful. As an aside, my son, who's 15, has developed a skill of making pies from scratch. He's decided he's going to take up baking. And so we have limitless amounts of pie in my house. This is not good.
You're getting closer to the camera here.
Yeah. I'm going to end up putting on the COVID-19 by the end of this quarantine. But so overconsumption, not just of unhealthy foods, which is kind of, as an emotional eater, that's problematic. Overconsumption of social media has not been good for me. Seeing kind of the divisiveness of, I've got friends from different realms, Christian and non-Christian, and from different political positions. And so I have to limit my consumption of social media, and I have to limit my consumption of actual media, of news, because sometimes it becomes a hollow echo chamber of bad news that, and empathically, I feel so heavy after I read how many deaths worldwide, how, what's happening with the economy. I have to limit my consumption of news so that I'm just informed, but not over informed to the point of causing my own depression.
Yeah, that word is a great one, overconsumption. Some of us don't even really know what we're feeling. Your experience with this, you've had therapy, you do therapy, you counsel others, some don't know, some are okay, right? Others are feeling, we go from sad to lonely to, I kind of like not having to commute every day or whatever that may be, right? Yeah. I guess in your expertise, what's the most helpful kind of practical way with dealing with any feeling right now?
Mm-hmm.
You
I've got a couple of tips. Yeah, I've got a couple of tips. First of all, when you're feeling really intense emotion, it's important to name it. Just name it, because what happens is there's overactivity in the amygdala, which is kind of the fear and anger, distress center of the brain. And there's so much neural energy happening there when we are in distress that it becomes overwhelming. So if you can begin to name what you're feeling, you can say, I'm angry, or I'm frustrated, or I'm so irritated, or whatever it is that you're feeling, I'm afraid. What is happening is you are taking that energy out of the amygdala through the prefrontal cortex, which is kind of the analysis and synthesis part of the brain, the executive functioning. And then as you're naming it out loud, you are taking more energy and putting it into areas of the brain that do verbal functioning, that help you articulate, to speak. So it's really important when you are in distress, especially, like if you're feeling intense joy, great, stay with it. But if you're in distress and you need to diffuse it, name it, just articulate it. And we have so many biblical models for this, who have been in distress, they've been afraid, they've been sad, they've lamented, they've prayed through their fear by naming their fear. And so there's this idea of, well, as Christians, we shouldn't feel afraid, we shouldn't feel sad. Oh, no. There are many models that have demonstrated that throughout Scripture, including Jesus, who wept at Lazarus' tomb and who prayed for that cup to be taken from him before he had to approach the cross. So fear and sadness are both very authentic human emotions. Yeah. But when we name them, then we begin to gain some control over them and can pray through them.
That's a great word. And I like the science behind it as well. Yeah. So Diane wrote to us, but right before I get to this, I want to say one thing to name it. How do you even identify it? Do we all go buy a feelings chart or look at the emojis?
There are feelings, there are emotion wheels on Google under images. You can find them. But even just saying, even babies have 4 or 5 basic emotions, and you can just name those: sad, happy, disgusted, angry, and afraid. So those are sufficient to name.
Think of those. Okay, so Diane asks us this: how do you deal with grief while being, and we're going to get there, Diane, you're right where we're going tonight, while being separated from family? She had a mom who passed away, and she's really been struggling with the physical distance from a family.
Yes.
Thank you, Diane.
There is no easy answer. There is no solution to that. I just have to sit with that for a second. Yeah. After my husband died, I longed for him so deeply. My children did too. And the hope of seeing him again is far, far away. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what do? We find ways to continue to have a relationship with him, despite the fact that he is no longer physically present in our lives. Mm-hmm. And the same is going with the people that I love that I can't see now, my siblings, my friends, relatives. It's so hard.
I can imagine Diane wanting to hug her family. I mean, they just lost their mom. I have a friend just yesterday lost her dad, and I think they're flying. I don't know how they're going to be together, but many times you can't say goodbye right now too. So I feel like it's grief upon grief.
Yes. And it's small griefs. I didn't get to say goodbye to my students, but really in the scope of the depth of grief that some of us have and are experiencing, that's small. I mean, we've got 100 small losses, and then some of us have deep, devastating losses. And the question of what do you do?
Social media or Zooming or calling only takes you so far, right?
Right. It feels empty. It feels hollow. And we long for, I think, when we are finally able to safely leave and rejoin, we will rush to each other. We will seek out those face-to-face moments. We will seek out those embraces more than we ever have before, because we've been starved of them. And I just feel so much gratitude that I do have those still who I can hug, I can run to. But as Diane said, and my heart just breaks for those who've lost loved ones and cannot embrace one another.
Yeah. Sorry, Diane. Hope that helps a little bit. This also brings up the idea of resilience. We hear a lot about resilience. You talk about resilience. Mm-hmm. What's your take on resilience and now? I hear, you come up through a tough childhood, but I was resilient, got through it. what's resilience look like now? And is it something we need to have? And is it a muscle we have to, try to use, or is it something we're born with?
Yeah, great question. And yes, it's something we are born with. We are all born with resilience, and we can build more in, but we are born with a kind of fundamental experience of resilience. And what this means is that, resilience is, you think of a plant that is fragile, and when a stiff wind comes up, it breaks in half or it is uprooted. That's not a resilient plant. A resilient plant is one that bends with the wind and then bounces back up. It's that elasticity that we see in rubber bands. Resilience is the ability to bounce back. And that person that you kind of referenced of, I had a tough childhood, but I was resilient. Yeah, you were. And we have all been. When you look back at how you've been resilient in other really hard times, you've been bullied as a kid, or your parents were divorced, or you had a broken family, or there was addiction in your family of origin, or you went through a divorce yourself. There are all of these hardships that every one of us face. How did you bounce back then? What was it that sustained you? What was it that got you through? And for me, it was my wit, it was my faith, and it was my connections to other people. And so that is still, even now, what I'm relying on is my wit, my faith, and my connection to other people. Other people might have other sources of resilience.
Okay. So basically, I guess it's a time then to think about resilience as we're identifying feelings, think of resilience and be mindful of, take stock in what have we been through in our lives? What
have we done? Yeah.
Right. What have we done? How have we overcome? And just be more mindful and maybe write them down or something, because, how do you become more resilient today?
So there are some things we can do. Of course, we look at what has worked for us in the past, but then also we can build some new strategies and new habits into our lives. I was talking to my therapist the other day, and yes, I do have a therapist. Everybody should. I was talking to my therapist, and I was, lamenting about how this life has been so hard, and it has. And now in this time of quarantine and the worries that I have, and he asked me, "Are you exercising?" And of course, I just kind of changed the subject, but he brought it back around and said, "You have to exercise. You know this about you." Yes, I do. So I'm starting to pick that habit back up. Are you connecting with people in healthy ways? Are you connecting with the right people who are supportive, who listen well, as opposed to maybe people that are critical or toxic or advice givers when that's not what you need? Are you pressing in with your faith? Are you seeking out relationship with God and with members of the church when maybe your impulse is to pull away? Are you pressing into your faith? So there are different habits that you can build in, but I think social connection and faith are really important. Exercise, healthy, like end each day with a vegetable. How about that? That might be a way to build your resilience. I got that from another friend who is way too healthy for my taste. But anyway, you can build new strategies in that will build your resilience. Yes.
Would you say, I can't help but think of humor, and is that part of building resilience, or is that a separate thing?
Absolutely. So what happens with humor is that when you don't have to be funny to use humor in resilience. You just need to be open to funny. You need to be open to laughter, to humor. So what happens with humor is that I'm looking at this really surreal experience that we are all being told to shelter in place, and I have a compromised immune system, so I can't even go to the grocery store. So I have just been here for far too long. And so what happens when I look at it through the lens of humor? So humor is right, or the situation is right here. The problem is right here. And when I'm looking at the problem, there's no peripheral vision. It just blocks all of my view. But if I can find a way to laugh about it, suddenly I have just brought that that problem into clarity, that I can now see it for what it is. And I see peripheral vision around it, and I can see definition. I can see it so much more clearly now. And so I watch funny people online. I watch YouTube videos. I watch dry bar comedy. I have collaborated with a comedy coach in writing new material. I've tried to make my kids laugh every day. I even dress up in costumes to take my garbage out to the bottom of the driveway because it's something to do. And
is that just since the pandemic, or do you always do that? Okay.
Don't judge.
Marianne,
don't judge.
Hey, but hey, we were being human, right? We're humor. Yep. So I have to tell you, I was on the phone with someone today, and I've been struggling with my own crisis of caring for my mom, my older mom, and sick and stuff. And, you know, there's a point where you tell your closest friends, same to house today, and it's a roller coaster every day. I'm sick of telling the story like that, right? So I'm on the phone with her today, and we could meet and talk about something, and we were laughing, and I said, it's really fun to share this and laugh about it because you've been in a similar situation. And we kind of laughed and said, we just need to get numb to it, you know, or whatever. Yeah. And we kind of joined with the laughter, and that alone made me feel better.
Yes, absolutely. And it's such a, next to hugging, laughter is the best way we can connect with one another. It's a way, it is an absolute connection, even if you don't, after the fact, remember what it was you were laughing about. But being able to laugh about the situation in the face of really hard times.
Yeah. It wasn't that I was laughing at the situation. I just got to, like you said, I stepped back. Clearly, it's very serious, but it was a nice point to let go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got another question for you too.
Okay, let's hear it. Okay,
Joe asked, so what are some strategies that he can use when he just starts to feel anxious, that overwhelming anxious? Like, is that where you put a, you know, elastic on your wrist and do that?
I guess you could. You could. I don't know how helpful that would be, but sure. A great question, Joe. Okay, so when you're feeling it bubbling up and it is feeling like it's going to choke you, first, breathe. Take very deep breaths, because your brain knows when it's being deprived of oxygen. It senses it, and then it goes into panic mode. So if you can take some deep breaths, you're oxygenating your blood, oxygenating your brain. So that's the first thing. Next, you want to, I have a grounding technique that we have used here I've used with the kids, I've used with clients and students. And what you do when you are in distress, and I encourage all the viewers right now to write this down. And I also have it in my book, to name 5 things that you can see, and you have to say it out loud. Again, you have to engage the verbal centers of your brain, the language centers. So name 5 things that you can see and name them out loud. Then you take a deep breath and you name 4 things that you can touch or feel, and you name those out loud. Take a deep breath, and then you name 3 things you can hear and name them out loud. Then take a deep breath, 2 things you can smell, and then a deep breath and name 1 thing that you can taste. And what happens is you are engaging your sensory processes. You are analyzing and synthesizing language, you're articulating it, and it's again pulling that energy out of the amygdala. So you take deep breaths, you name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. You may have to do it more than once. Mm-hmm. And then when you've calmed down, you've been breathing, you've done this grounding technique, then think about, what's the next thing I can do? Just do the next thing. When I was just in the deepest part of my grief, shortly after Scott died, I was stunned and devastated. And he went 4.5 months from diagnosis to death. And after he died, I just didn't know what to do with myself. And so I went to Grief Share, which anyone who's grieving, I strongly encourage you to do Grief Share. I went through it 3 times myself. And one of the pieces of advice they have is just do the next thing. Just do the next thing, and then take a break. Mm-hmm. You're done. And that next thing might be throw a load of laundry in the wash, or go for a walk, or call your friend, or read a passage, but just do the next thing that you know is going to be good for you, that's going to move you forward. So when you're really in the deepest levels of distress, breathe, name things that you can see, touch, hear, smell, taste, and then do the next thing.
Those are great, really tangible. Thanks for that question, Joe. This is a
Excellent.
question from Dave. We've been sheltering in place now for 5 weeks or so. A lot of us are experiencing loneliness, even if we live with people. I think we no longer have our church community groups, book groups, our dinners out with friends. How can we overcome loneliness when we feel so isolated? Other than social media and Zoom.
Right.
I know.
I just want to say that we might be approaching this idea of loneliness as though it is just the worst thing in the world. And maybe this time of loneliness is an opportunity to take stock of what really does fill you up. Who really fills you up? How do you get those needs met previously to this pandemic? And how will you go about getting those needs met after we are no longer sheltering in place? But this is an opportunity to start to really like yourself again and build that relationship with yourself again. If you are a person of faith, this is an opportunity to really press in to see how does the Lord meet those isolation and loneliness needs. And I don't mean that as a platitude or a cliche, but on the deepest levels, how are those needs being met spiritually? And then who do you miss? Who do you long for? And how do you find those individuals in your life again once this is over? And to maybe build some strategies into your life of true connection. Yeah. So loneliness doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. And you're talking, Marianne, to somebody who thinks that pain isn't necessarily a bad thing. Adversity isn't necessarily a bad thing. Grief is not necessarily a bad thing. So we don't have to escape from them. We can press into them and explore them. What
you're saying makes me think of, and we've talked about this, silver linings. I mean, it's what keeps me hopeful and focused on God a lot. And so I don't want to poo-poo it because it's really been helpful to me. And I look at this and I say, don't think of it as loneliness, but turn the perspective around. That to me is kind of silver linings. What do you say about silver lining? Is it blowing?
Well, Marianne, in our first conversation on the phone, we'd not met before, and she was like, everything has a silver lining. I said, yeah, but that means there's a really dark cloud in the middle of it. Wah, wah. Call me Debbie Downer. But here's the deal: is that it's true. Is it a quote from Princess Bride? Life is pain. Anybody who tells you different is trying to sell you something. I mean, the reality is, yes, there is hope, and we have joy, and we have humor, and all these different beautiful experiences, but there's also beauty in that loneliness. You have to admit that there's something really bittersweet about the fact that we had these deep connections with people and now we're missing those deep connections and that we're longing for them. It tells you that this is what we were designed for. We were designed to be in relationship with God and with other people. And so this experience of loneliness, as painful as it is also a deep and profound reminder of what will come again, especially if we are intentional about it and we seek it out.
Right. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I get it. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to call your attention to something. Now I'm going to try to share my screen again. So bear with me.
Here we go. Oh, this is going to be fun.
So I'm scrolling my social because that's what I do. And can you see this?
I see it. It's okay to grieve.
It's okay to grieve. Now I have to tell you, I canceled trips, children's birthday parties canceled, birth plans, who knows who can go to the doctor. We've got a colleague who can't go to the doctor with his wife, weddings. I have a friend who's canceled their wedding. Paychecks have been canceled, time with loved ones, freedom, graduations, as you know, baby showers. And I'm looking going, this is grief. And so I guess my question is, are we grieving? And how can you tell the difference between grieving and being frustrated and angry?
Great question. Okay. I'm going to have you take that back down so everyone can see
sure?
me close up now.
Hold on.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah, okay.
Hey, you did it. Well done. Atta girl. So what is the difference between grief, depression, and anxiety? I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
Anxiety is what we've kind of been talking about already. The fears as they bubble up, and you're having a hard time breathing, and you're not thinking straight, and you're feeling tense and wound up, and you're checking the news and checking Facebook, and you're hyper vigilant about what the possible threats are. And so we know what anxiety feels like. But grief also feels like anxiety. I had a friend who did her dissertation specifically on that question of, is grief and anxiety similar? Yes, they are. And is depression and grief similar? Yes, they are. They both have these overwhelming rumination of loss and fatigue and sadness and numbness and exhaustion and low energy and difficulty sleeping and difficulty eating, or changes in appetite and sleep habits. And so all of these things are also very similar, grief and depression. The differences are that a clinical depression and generalized anxiety disorders are both treated well with SSRIs, which are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They are managed well with medication and therapy. Grief, you can't medicate grief because it's not a neurochemical condition. It's a heart condition. It's a psych ache. It's a loss. So let's look a little bit closer at the difference between grief and depression. Both involve a devastating loss. But with grief, it's something we can name. Okay. With depression, we're not quite sure what we've lost. And especially with the difference between bereavement and depression, both involve the loss of a loved one, but with bereavement, it's the loss of somebody else. And with depression, it's the loss of the self. Okay. And so when you're grieving something outside of yourself that is missing or gone, a person, an expectation, a hope, a dream of that wedding, or hope of that funeral, even the hope of graduation, of prom, all these different losses. We can name what we've lost, and that is grief. When you can't quite put your finger on why you are so sad, that's depression.
Okay. I can be angry and grieve. Doesn't mean I'm stressed.
Sister, yes.
But so I can't do whatever now because of this pandemic. I'm mad about it.
But you're also grieving.
And I'm also grieving.
Yes, absolutely. Grief has this whole range of emotions, this entire emotional spectrum from numbness to joy, actually, and everything in between on that unpleasant to pleasant spectrum. So we're grieving when we can name what we've lost. If we can't quite put our finger on it, then it's a depression, and that's something else. I think universally we are all grieving.
Those are really good differences. Sharon's asking a question, but first I want to get to, because you mentioned this was really important. When do we need to ask for help? When do we go, I can't do it. My family can't help me. How do you know? When do you do that?
So in psychology, as a clinical psychologist, we'll diagnose somebody, we'll say, yeah, this is a concern. When? There are 4 Ds that describe this. The first is your behavior or your emotional reaction deviant from how you normally respond to a stressor? So when I'm stressed out, I get clumsy, right? I drop things, I trip, I get clumsy. I know that's my stress reaction. If, however, I start flying into a rage, that's not me. I don't get angry easily. So if I start flying into a rage, or I start wanting to cut myself, or I'm thinking about hurting somebody else, or I'm really irritable, or I'm crying a lot, that's not my norm. So is it deviant from how you usually behave when you're under stress? Second, is it distressing? Are you unconsolable? Can you not self-soothe? Can you not manage your emotion, name them, do some, 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, calm yourself down? Or if nobody else can calm you down, but as adults, we should be able to calm ourselves down. We shouldn't rely on other people to console us when we are in distress. Yeah. So is it deviant, and is it so distressing that you cannot self-soothe? And then is it dysfunctional? Is your response, your reaction to the stress causing dysfunction, that you can't work, you can't parent, you can't be a partner to your spouse, or you can't reach out to other people to connect. So it's interfering with your functioning.
Gotcha.
You're not taking care of yourself, you're not taking showers, you're not eating, or you're not sleeping. Those are impaired functions. And then the last D, so we're looking at deviant, distressing, dysfunctional. And the last one is there danger?
Okay.
Are you hurting another person? Are you hurting yourself? Are you having thoughts of causing your own death, or are you having thoughts of causing harm to another person? When danger is involved, it is immediately an imperative to seek help. So when you're just not you're not your best self, very few of us are right now. That's not a mental health concern.
Okay.
But when you are starting to have really extreme reactions that you cannot self-soothe, it's getting in your way of functioning, and you're potentially causing harm to yourself or other people, it's time to make a phone call.
I'm going to get to Sharon's question, but I want you to know you can ask any questions if you're sitting there at home, or comments. You
Please.
can also check out the resources. Melissa's got a ton of resources in the comment section. Just don't want you to forget that. Okay, Sharon asked this: what can I do when it starts to feel like every day is the same and it just runs together? We've seen some good memes on this, right? It's like it's Thursday, Monday, or it doesn't even really matter right now. Can I keep my brain active right now?
Yeah, well, a friend of mine, I don't know how inappropriate this is for KTIS, but a friend of mine sent me on Amazon, I think you can buy underpants that have the days of the week on them, just so you know, just so you can self-locate what day it is.
Yeah.
So Sharon, there you go. That's my answer.
There you go, Sharon. Amazon.
But I think, I'm a fan of journaling. Usually I will buy a journal, I'll write in it about 3 days in a row, and then I'll get tired of it and throw it in the cupboard and then buy a new one a couple of months later.
Yeah.
But I have found that journaling, even in my daily planner, has helped.
Yeah.
But I guess my question too is, what's wrong with the days running together?
I was going to say that. Like, I get up knowing it's the right day. By middle of the day, I forget the day. By at night, I go, okay, I know again. And I wake up not knowing. So
we're not, I think for me, I'm not being called to do. Like, I have a job. I'm teaching full-time online for University of Northwestern, which, by the way, is the best job in the entire world, is teaching for University of Northwestern. So I'm doing that, yes, but I don't feel like God is calling me to do as much as he is calling me to be right now. This is a transformative process. And I guess my question for myself, and I suppose for everybody else, is, who are you going to be when this is all over? Who are you being now? Who are you going to be when this is all done? My son, who's 15, said that just kind of out of the blue one day, he goes, I suppose my grandkids are going to be asking to interview me about this for school projects, huh? And I said, yeah, they probably will. What are you going to tell them? We are all going to be kind of called upon to report. And what are we going to tell them about who we were? Not just how, the rush on toilet paper or the difficult economy, but who were we in this process?
That brings us up to our whole next section on God's purpose for us. But before we go there, Caroline asks us, what do I do if I can't talk to my therapist because of COVID-19? And you and I spoke about this, because I have a friend who's a therapist who does Zoom. It's not quite the same, but it's helpful. What do you say to?
Yeah, keep pressuring them to do telehealth, because there is no excuse not to be doing that now. Most therapists are now doing, I talk to mine on the phone. I don't talk to people on the phone hardly ever, but I talked to him on the phone the other day, and it was extremely helpful. Even though I couldn't see him, it was still a great session.
Will you have resources for us there if Caroline, for whatever reason, is unable to do that? Are there?
Yes, I've listed the substance abuse and mental health department. So they're a kind of a location service for us. And it's, even if you cannot afford, if you don't have insurance and you require services, They can help locate services that way. And then also Psychology Today has this kind of a locator. You put in your zip code and they help you locate therapists in your area who will be advertising that they do telehealth.
Right. Okay. Carolyn, check you with your therapist first. Maybe they'll start Zooming this week. Will be good.
Yes.
So my next, really, I've been thinking about, and I'm so glad you said this, that God does have a purpose for each one of us in spite of our circumstances, and usually because of our circumstances, right? I woke up this morning and it was pointed to Psalm 73. I'm going to try to, it's a very quick one. I'm going to share my screen again.
Yay, I love it when you try to do this.
Here we go.
Hey, good job.
My health may fail, my spirit may grow weak, but God remains the strength of my heart. And I literally have to say that strong and every time. He's mine forever. He, remains a strength. And that's what brought me peace today. It doesn't always, I'm just like everyone else, doesn't always, but it really did today. Can you share some tips that you have on how do you connecting with God when we're feeling anxious and lonely and all these things that, we're just navigating our feelings and trying to stay on top of it. Oh yeah. And we got to bring it all to God first. And what are some of your tips, because sometimes it's the last thing I want to do,
I hear you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's not just, it's the last thing I want to do, but I don't think I know who he is anymore if he's letting this happen. I think I'm hearing these doubts and I heard them when Scott died. My daughter at one point said, what kind of God thought this was a good idea that my dad died 4 days before my senior year started? And that's a tough question to answer. Like, what is the character of God in the face of this situation? Is he sovereign? Is he in control? And when I look at who he is in my life and who he has been throughout my life, I always go back to John. I've lost the citation, but the shortest book in the verse in the Bible, Marianne, what is it? The shortest verse. Jesus wept in the context of the death of his friend. He wept. He didn't ordain this. Yes, it's passing through his hands, but he is watching and weeping the brokenness of our world. And I do believe that he is calling us, but he knows that this loss is hard. These losses are hard. He knows this is hard. It reminds me of that Anne Lamott quote. I just, everything I've ever let go of has claw marks on it. We're holding on so tightly to these things, and yet we are being asked to let them go. Because God is not, he is not about changing our circumstances to make us happy. That's never been what he's about. He does not change he doesn't do anything in order to make us happy. He doesn't change those circumstances. This is what Paul Tripp says. God does not change our circumstances to make us happy. He changes us through our circumstances in order to make us holy. And I cling to that. This is what God is, he's asking of me, is to stop holding on so tightly because you don't know what I have in store for you next. And I think about, I've told the story in the past, and but it makes me kind of laugh. I'm not much of a gardener, Marianne. I garden through neglect. So every May, or usually I don't get around to it until early June, I'll go and I'll buy a tomato plant, usually like a beef eater or something. I'll bring it home and I'll plant it in the garden, and I'll kick some dirt around it and stomp it down and wish it good luck and then walk away. And I don't actually go back to revisit that tomato plant until sometime in August. So a friend of mine was also raising a tomato plant. This was the first one she'd ever done after she bought her new house. And she was very excited about her tomato plant. And she loved this tomato plant so clearly. Like she put a little cage around it, and she had it in just the right amount of sunlight, and she would water it religiously every day. And even had me go and water her plant for her when she went on vacation, which is hilarious because I never water my own tomato plant, but I would drive the 20 minutes to and from to water her plant. And I noticed that her little tomato plant, you could almost see the root system just below the surface of the soil. It was just so well tended that it didn't have to reach for anything. And so I came back home after watering her plant, and I went into the backyard to look at mine. And this thing was big and ropey and thick, and it had thrown like vine tendrils out to the nearby fence line to hold itself up. And it was like leaning out past the oak tree to get sunlight. I mean, this thing. And then when the fall frost hit, I pulled it up out of the ground, and it had this deep root system because with adversity, it had to dig deep to access moisture. It had to dig deep to access nutrients. It had to reach high to get sunlight. It had to reach out to support itself. And this is what's been happening with me and my kids in our grief. And maybe what's happening to all of us now is that we are having to dig deep to understand the character of God. Who is he really? Does he really fit with our shaky theology of the character of God? Or are we really searching to know him? We also are reaching out for support because we're so isolated and alone that we are reaching out far to connect with people. And we're reaching up high to understand what is to come of this. What are we called to be? What is our purpose or our meaning? What is this season doing for us, to transform us?
Yeah. So our hope is still in him.
Yes.
Our peace is still in him.
Yes.
And it just sounds like he is still, the vine.
Yes. And I just really want to encourage everybody to, again, search the scriptures. When I read with questions in my head always of what does it say about God? What does it say about others? What does it say about the scripture passage say about me? And I think sometimes we're too busy reading about what does it say about me? What's the message for me?
Right.
And we're not really searching what does it say about God? Like the true nature and character of his sovereignty, of his wisdom, of his love. So I think we need to revisit that.
Yeah. Hate to say the silver lining, the opportunity, but wow, jam-packed information. Thank you just for sharing your knowledge, your resources again on the comment section. This will be up if you didn't have a chance to catch it all tonight. Come back up to our page if you want to share it with family and friends. All the resources will be there. Feel free to still ask questions. Before we say goodnight, though, I want to encourage you. One of the best songs that has uplifted me that KTIS plays, it's called Waymaker. It's by Leland. The link is also going to be in the comments. Joe, thank you for all the work you've done tonight and putting the links on the page for us and getting us set up at our homes on Zoom and for this fabulous logo background so people know where we are when they're scrolling. But this song, though, it's been my go-to song, and music is that for a lot of us who love KTIS. And it reminds me of God's powerful promise. And I just want to read you these lines. It's at the very end. They're almost half spoken, half sung. His name is above depression. His name is above loneliness. His name is above disease. His name is above cancer. His name is above every other name. Listen to it. Love it. Love your neighbors. Love God. Good night. Thank you. Be safe. God bless.
Bye.
Thanks, Melissa. Bye-bye.
My pleasure.